Marcus Laughlin had always been fascinated by St. Martin's Cathedral. Even as a child, he would beg his parents to let him explore the vast halls, admiring the stained glass windows and the countless carvings of saints and martyrs that lined every arch. Now, as a doctoral student in architectural history, he spent most nights in the cathedral's quiet library, poring over dusty records. He discovered details not often discussed. References to clandestine rituals, cryptic symbols, and strange occurrences linked to gargoyle statues perched on the cathedral's roof. Something about those snarling, winged creatures tugged at his curiosity. They seemed out of place in the modern city. Townsfolk who passed by them daily were more concerned with the traffic and their smartphones than with any legends lurking overhead. Tonight, Marcus was hunting for any document mentioning a protective relic he'd read about in the diaries of the cathedral's founder, Bishop Callistus. The diaries alluded to an artifact revered, possibly cursed, hidden somewhere beneath the city. According to the bishop's writings, the gargoyles served to ward off evil forces seeking the relic's power. Despite the cautionary tone in the ancient text, Marcus was drawn to the story's mystery. He hunched over a table in a dimly lit alcove, leafing through an old tome. The musty odor of parchment filled the air, and the hush of the silent library enveloped him like a blanket. He paused when he stumbled upon a peculiar entry in a collection of 14th-century letters. It described how, once every century, there came a threat to the city's core. A threat connected to the relic, and in response, stone watchers would awaken from their slumber to defend the cathedral and its surroundings. The letter offered no explanation of how gargoyle statues could come to life, but the writer seemed entirely convinced of their sentience. Marcus felt a ripple of unease. Were these letters mere myths, or was there something real sleeping in the cathedral's stone guardians? The distant ring of the cathedral's bells made him glance at his watch. Midnight. Time always slipped away when he was immersed in forgotten histories. With the letters' haunting words echoing in his mind, Marcus collected his notes, unaware that the quiet hush around him was just starting to stir. Under the pale glow of a full moon, 4 figures crept through the cathedral's side gate. Armed with flashlights and a sense of purpose, they moved in synchronized silence. At the front was Roland Gaspard, a wealthy art collector rumored to have an appetite for illicit acquisitions. His imposing frame cast a long shadow across the cobblestones. Beside him walked Claire Morisseau, her gaze darting nervously towards the looming garlands of stone carved above. The 2 men behind them, muscular and tight-lipped, carried equipment in black duffel bags. This clandestine group navigated around the cathedral's courtyard, where gargoyles crouched on window ledges and peered down from cornices. On more than one occasion, Claire thought she saw their stone eyes flicker, but she dismissed it as her nerves. They approached a half-hidden entrance to the undercroft, its iron door padlocked. Roland produced a key whose authenticity Marcus had dangerously overlooked. With a deft turn, the door groaned open. A stale gust of air rushed to meet them. Claire grimaced at the dank smell but pressed on into the dark corridor. Cobwebs draped the ceiling, and only their flashlights guided the way. Roland had purchased evidence of a relic hidden beneath the cathedral, an artifact supposedly brimming with arcane energy. He believed it could give him influence far beyond the realm of art collecting, something to pivot the balance of power in ways only whispered about. He planned to augment his fortune by controlling the very lifeblood of the city's mythic protection. The others were mere tools aiding his pursuit of this rumored prize. As they ventured deeper, the corridor split into labyrinthine passages. Dim carvings on the walls depicted robed figures, gargoyles perched above them, and shapes that might have been demonic. Shadow and light played tricks on the mind, but Roland's determination was unwavering. With methodical precision, he consulted an old map. Just then, the ground seemed to vibrate ever so slightly. Dust particles cascaded from the ceiling, and somewhere above, a muffled growl reverberated. Claire froze, her heart thumping. She scanned the gloom. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. The men behind her tensed, hands sliding to the weapons concealed beneath their jackets. Roland gave them a nod. They continued forward, oblivious to how the hush of the cathedral's undercroft was gradually coming alive with centuries of pent-up vigilance. Marcus shut the library door behind him and stepped into the cathedral nave, hoping to calm the strange excitement taking hold of his imagination. The main hall was majestic, even during the day, but at night, under the flickering glow of devotional candles, it was transformed into a realm of eerie splendor. Slender pillars rose toward the vaulted ceiling, stained glass windows glinted with moonlight, and the gargoyles perched just outside seemed more animate than ever. The thick hush of centuries saturated every crevice. He remembered the letter's description of a hidden relic and the protective gargoyles, which were rumored to awaken in times of dire need. A sudden, moaning rasp startled Marcus from his reverie. He glanced around, expecting to see a caretaker or a visitor, but saw no one. A flicker of movement near the roof-high windows drew his attention. At first it could have been a trick of the light or his overstimulated senses, but there it was again, a subtle shift of wings on stone. He gaped in astonishment as one gargoyle seemed to stretch, its claws flexing against the cathedral's ledge. For a heartbeat, Marcus convinced himself he was hallucinating, exhaustion clouding his senses. But then, another gargoyle above the apse twitched its tail. A low rumble swept through the high rafters. Heart pounding, Marcus took an instinctive step backward, the uneven stone floor pressing into his shoes. Suddenly, an echoing clang resonated from somewhere beneath him. Perhaps from the crypt or subterranean passages. Whatever was happening, it was leading him deeper into the mysterious domain that, until now, had existed only as rumor and legend. He took a deep breath, adrenaline surging, and pressed toward the door that led to the undercroft. The old gate was slightly ajar and bore fresh marks. Something or someone had forced entry. He stood there, uncertain whether to call for help or push onward alone. But his curiosity overcame his fear. He lifted a half-burnt candle from a nearby stand, using its flickering flame to guide him into the darkness below. Outside, the moon's silver glow illuminated the cathedral's upper levels, where the gargoyles sat in stoic readiness. One by one they began to uncoil. Prey instincts, carved into their very forms, stirred to life as they sensed a disturbance in the sacred halls beneath. The oldest gargoyle, perched above a statue of Saint Michael, slowly separated its claws from the stone ridge where it had clung for centuries. Its granite eyes flickered with internal fire, awakened by the threat that drew near the city's hidden relic. Around it, fellow sentinels followed suit, and the hush in the night was soon broken by the scraping of claws against stone. From the vantage of the city streets, an insomniac taxi driver might glance in passing, wondering if the shifting shadows atop the cathedral were from the fluttering of nocturnal birds. A pair of late-night partygoers might pause, goosebumps rising on their arms as low growls carried across the moonlit plaza. But no one truly imagined that St. Martin's gargoyles were waking to fulfill a duty entrusted to them eons ago. The city had largely forgotten they were more than ornamentation. In that forgetting, it had grown vulnerable. As the gargoyles stretched and tested their wings, small fragments of stone and dust crumbled from their bodies, leaving ephemeral trails in the air. Their senses reached down into the labyrinth beneath the cathedral, where intruders were tampering with things beyond their mortal understanding. The relic must not fall into the wrong hands. Enchanted by old sacred vows, these beings, part statue, part living sentinel, embodied an ancient oath to protect. Tonight, that oath would be tested, and the city's most arcane defenders were preparing to meet the threat. Roland's group reached a circular chamber lined with half-broken columns. Time had eroded some of the floor, revealing a subterranean pit. At the center stood a massive altar carved from black granite, ringed by luminescent script that seemed to pulse with a subtle glow. Eager triumph lit Roland's eyes. An indentation in the altar's center hinted at where the rumored relic ought to be. He felt certain that this was it. "Check the perimeter," he ordered one of his men. Meanwhile, he and Claire inched closer to the structure. If Roland could pry free whatever lay within that altar, a new world of possibilities would open. Rarely had he felt such raw anticipation. Half of him expected angels or demons to spring from the walls. A jarring, scraping noise echoed from the darkness, causing them all to pause. The broad-shouldered man exploring the perimeter froze in confusion. Claire tightened her grip on the flashlight. "We should be careful," she muttered. Roland nodded, half distracted by the swirling script on the altar's surface. He placed a hand tentatively on the cold granite. A spark coursed through his fingertips, enough to make him wince and jerk back. It was as if the stone were alive, resisting him. Forcing a twisted grin, Roland pulled a small crowbar from his bag and began prying at a carved seam. Before he could tear open the recess, a thunderous crash erupted behind them. They spun around. A gargoyle, monstrous and winged, stood at the entrance. Its stone eyes glowed with malevolent light, and a deep growl resonated from its chest. Another gargoyle followed, blocking the other corridor. The men raised their guns impulsively, but these were no ordinary enemies. Decades, centuries, possibly millennia of dark guardianship radiated from their hulking forms. Roland clenched the crowbar. He had believed the legends were overblown. Fear lanced through him as he realized his mistake. Yet greed is a stubborn force. He refused to relinquish his quest merely because the relic's protectors had emerged. Marcus, candle flickering in his grip, navigated the winding corridors. Distant growls and echoes directed him. Shadows danced dramatically on the cold walls. At each turn, the architecture grew more cryptic. Walls carved with stylized gargoyle forms, arcs of strange runes overhead, an occasional mosaic hinting at an ancient battle between monstrous shapes and robed bishops. Every step took him closer to the heart of old legends. Still, part of him clung to the hope that this was some elaborate dream from which he would abruptly awaken. But the bruises on his shins obtained from stumbling over uneven stones assured him he was fully conscious. As he rounded a final corner, he glimpsed a faint glow emanating from a chamber up ahead. He hesitated. The air felt charged, electric with tension. An urgent roar echoed off the walls, followed by panicked shouts. Heart-thumping painfully, Marcus leaned forward and peered into the chamber. His eyes fell upon a sight he could scarcely process. Two swarthy men firing their weapons at monstrous figures, bullets ricocheting off stony skin. Another man, older, wielded a crowbar and was hacking at an ornate altar. Meanwhile, gargoyles, real, living gargoyles, towered near the entrances, claws scraping the flagstones. Claire stood aside, eyes wide, as if torn between helping Roland and fleeing in terror. Marcus realized the men sought something within the altar, possibly the relic that the bishop's diary described. The gargoyles were the protectors, and whether from a surge of moral courage or a historian's respect for the city's heritage, Marcus felt compelled to intervene. He stepped into the chamber with caution. "Stop!" he called. His voice wavered but maintained determination. Everyone turned to him, Roland's group with anger and confusion, the gargoyles with silent stone intensity. Marcus struggled to appear composed. "That artifact was sealed for a reason," he said. "You have no idea what you're about to unleash." A harsh laugh came from Roland, accompanied by a new flurry of sparks. As he resumed prying at the altar, a hairline crack spread across the carved lid. One gargoyle, roaring, lunged forward. One of the men tried to shoot it again, to no avail. A chaotic melee erupted. The gargoyle nearest the broken columns leapt into the center of the room, wings extended. It barreled into one of Roland's men, sending him flying. Though the blow was not lethal, it rattled him enough to drop his gun. Another gargoyle advanced on Roland himself, eyes blazing with earthen fury. Roland swung the crowbar in a parry, striking its stony flank. Sparks flew. The gargoyle let out a guttural roar that rattled the very pillars. Claire stumbled backward, nearly colliding with Marcus, who instinctively grabbed her arm to steady her. She stared at him, her face pale. "We need to get away from here," she urged, but her plea sounded half-hearted, as if dazzled by the terrifying reality of living statues. Marcus touched her shoulder in an attempt at reassurance. "You have to stop him," he said, gesturing at Roland. "The diary suggests that artifact can tear the city apart if it's misused." They shared a look of mutual alarm before she broke free, darting toward Roland. He was still grappling with the lid of the altar, trying to pry it open while dodging the gargoyle's strikes. Another stony creature joined the fray from behind the columns, cornering the other armed man. A swirl of dust and rubble clouded the chamber as wings and claws met desperate human shouts. Each gargoyle moved with almost liquid grace, unburdened by the limitations of flesh, as if the centuries had shaped them into unstoppable guardians of the deep. Roland refused to yield. With a deafening crack, he forced the stone lid to shift. A blinding green light emanated from within. The gargoyles bellowed as if outraged at the breach. Marcus, raising his hand to shield his eyes, watched in horror as Claire tried to pull Roland away, but the older man's lust for power was stronger than her persuasion. Could it be that the bishop's worst fears were about to come true? The moment Roland tore the relic from its resting place, a shockwave rippled through the chamber. Cracks snaked up the walls, ancient mortar crumbled, and sections of stone columns began to shudder. The relic itself was a spherical object with swirling emerald patterns pulsating like a beating heart. Its luminescence cast a sickly glow on Roland's triumphant face. Marcus felt an intense shiver course through him, as if the very air had turned fatal. One gargoyle roared so loudly that dust cascaded from the ceiling, and the gargoyle launched itself directly at Roland. He stumbled backward, relic pressed to his chest, avoiding the gargoyle's claws by mere inches. Claire let out a cry, uncertain whether to help him or flee. The other men were pinned by the additional gargoyles, forced to surrender or risk lethal strikes. Marcus rushed forward, reaching out to snatch the relic from Roland's grasp. Perhaps it was desperation or a sense of duty gleaned from his readings, but Marcus knew that if the artifact remained in Roland's hands, doom might follow both the cathedral and the entire city. Magic crackled like electricity along the sphere's surface, stinging Marcus's fingertips. Roland clung to it, spittle flecking his lips. "It's mine!" he yelled. A surge of raw power coursed outward, momentarily pushing Marcus aside. Roland's eyes narrowed with delirious triumph. The gargoyle hovered close, wings thrashing the air, baring fangs and unleashing a guttural snarl that reverberated in the chamber. Claire, trembling, made one final attempt to reason with Roland. "Give it up," she begged. "Don't you see it's destroying everything?" Roland shook his head violently, ignoring the cracks spreading through the walls. With the ceiling threatening to collapse, the gargoyles pressed their advantage. Two of them lunged at Roland simultaneously, forcing him to his knees. The relic slipped from his grasp and rolled across the trembling floor, green light flaring in frantic pulses. Marcus scrambled toward it. As soon as his hands touched the sphere, he felt a fierce jolt, as if an ancient consciousness was scanning him. He gasped, trying to still his shaking breath, and concentrated on the bishop's warnings. The artifact must be returned to its rightful place or laid to rest with purity of intent. Plaster and stone rained down as the chamber threatened to implode. Gunshots rang out again, but it was difficult to see through the clouds of dust. Somewhere behind him, Marcus heard Roland cursing, accompanied by gargoyle growls. Keeping the relic close to his chest, Marcus rose unsteadily to his feet. He had to place it back on the altar, or at least somewhere safe, before the unleashed powers overwhelmed them all. Darkness started creeping into his periphery, but he forced himself forward. The surreal glow of the sphere guided him. He staggered toward the altar, only to see a massive crack running down its side. If the altar could no longer contain the artifact, he would have to improvise. The labyrinth beyond might hold a solution for sealing it away. One gargoyle approached him, its expression inscrutable behind its stony features. Marcus froze. Rather than attacking, the creature extended its claws gently, as if to convey that it understood his intent. Marcus recalled the diary's mention of ancient guardians who could sense the difference between friend and foe. Summoning his courage, he nodded to the gargoyle, who in turn moved aside, granting him a path. Beams of the cathedral's foundation groaned ominously. Roland's men had retreated from the onslaught of gargoyle fury, leaving only Claire, who cringed near a crumbling column. Roland himself was pinned under the oldest gargoyle, his triumphant bravado shattered, replaced by futile rage. He struggled in vain, his eyes darting toward the relic in Marcus's hands. Meanwhile, dust choked the air, and the flickering green glow cast monstrous shadows over every surface. Marcus bolted, guided by the gargoyle that had stepped aside for him. With surprising agility, the creature led him to a smaller antechamber off to the side. The floor sloped downward, revealing a wide cistern brimming with dark, stagnant water. The gargoyle pointed a claw toward the water's surface, eyes reflecting a fierce light. In a flash of realization, Marcus remembered the diaries, explaining that water from the cathedral's ancient spring was an integral part of sealing the artifact's power. He hesitated for just a moment before lowering the artifact into the cistern. A fierce hiss echoed through the antechamber. Green light flared, then fizzled as the water enveloped the sphere. A searing jolt streaked up Marcus's arms, forcing him to gasp and release it. The relic submerged, and a vortex of bubbles erupted on the surface. With a whoosh that felt like the release of centuries of tension, the swirling glow faded, leaving only the dim reflection of chamber torches in the black water. Marcus sank to his knees, heart pounding in relief. The strangling sense of dread that had weighed on him vanished, replaced by an almost serene calm. Back in the main chamber, the tremors subsided. The gargoyles stood as unmoving shadows among the ruins, silent now that the danger had passed. Marcus wiped the sweat and dust from his face, feeling a presence behind him. He turned to see the gargoyle that had guided him, quietly observing. There was an inexplicable intelligence in its stony eyes. Slowly, it bowed its great head in a gesture of acknowledgement. Then, as if commanded by an invisible signal, it turned and moved back into the corridor. When Marcus returned to the altar room, the scene was subdued. Roland's men were disarmed, cowering under the direct gaze of two hovering gargoyles. Claire knelt beside Roland, who was unconscious, possibly from shock. Chunks of ceiling lay scattered across the floor, and broken columns sagged precariously. A swirling layer of dust still hung in the air, glinting in the dim torchlight. Marcus realized they all had to leave quickly, lest the entire space collapse. But the gargoyles appeared to have lost any interest in violence. Their mission, it seemed, was complete. They stood guard for a few moments more, then, as Marcus gently helped Claire to her feet, they retreated. Claire couldn't meet Marcus's gaze at first, shame waging war with relief. "I had no idea it was real," she whispered. "He said it was just fabled treasure. I didn't think—" Marcus offered a tight smile, too exhausted to muster any reproach. "Let's just focus on getting out of here," he said. They urged the rest of Roland's men to move. The gargoyles drifted behind, ensuring no one tried anything rash. Together, the group navigated the corridors back to the stairs leading up to the nave. Once in the main body of the cathedral, the sudden flood of moonlight felt cleansing, even as it revealed streaks of dust across everyone's hair, faces, and clothing. Roland groaned as he regained consciousness. He tried to speak, but Claire shook her head and shushed him, her eyes wet with remorse. Marcus gazed upward. High above, faint silhouettes circled the rooftop spires. The gargoyles were returning to their perches, settling back into their stone forms. For a moment, Marcus wondered if he felt a silent camaraderie, or even gratitude, radiating from those ancient guardians. In less than an hour, everything had changed. Centuries-old myths had come crashing into his life, proving that legends sometimes held more truth than expected. With the relic sealed, the city was safe. For now. He shivered at the thought of what might happen if someone else tried to claim it. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Likely someone had heard the catacombs crumble or seen suspicious figures skulking around the cathedral. Marcus realized he'd have a lot of explaining to do, but also that the real story might be too unbelievable for most. Perhaps he would shield the gargoyles from fame, guiding investigators to a partial truth, that thieves had broken in, damaged the undercroft, and triggered a structural collapse. He could almost hear the scoffing if he dared to describe living stone guardians. He had seen them, though, and that knowledge would stay with him. They emerged from the cathedral just as the first police car pulled up, lights flashing indignantly against the ancient walls. Claire steadied Roland, who was too weak and stunned to resist. Marcus stepped in front, arms raised in a gesture of peace, ready with a carefully edited account of the night's events. As more officers arrived, the moon dipped behind the skyline, and a hush seemed to caress the cathedral's facade. If anyone looked carefully, they might notice that the gargoyles were posed slightly differently than they had been yesterday, their features subtly gentler, or perhaps more satisfied. Amid the chatter, the questioning, and the confusion, Marcus glanced once more at the silent watchers perched overhead. His studies had never prepared him for this reality, but someone needed to remember the truth. He felt certain that the city owed its survival to these nocturnal defenders. Deep below, the relic remained submerged, hopefully dormant for centuries to come. And above, guarding the highest spires of St. Martin's Cathedral, the gargoyles stood ready, ancient conspirators turned guardians, ensuring that when the next threat arose,